All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott, Information Technology Instructor at Rankin Technical College. And as mentioned in the previous video, what I'm going to do now is for the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development 1111 .NET Framework with Web Databases class, I'm going to go over this series of 12 lessons from DotNetOdyessy.com that's called ASP.NET 5 Free Course. And as you probably guess, I'm going to start with Chapter 1, About Web Application Development and ASP.NET MVC. In this chapter, you'll learn how the web works and about web application development. You'll also get to know how ASP.NET Model View Controller, or MVC, fits into web application development, into the ecosystem. All right, so let's just start. Okay, again, this is part 1 of 12. All right. Now, I never have a terrific idea of everyone who is watching this video what their particular expertise is regarding the web. So I'm going over every page in this. As it says, all web applications use the HTTP protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. And it's used either in a more unsecure format, HTTP, or as many are using today in a more secured format, HTTPS, to send data and receive, or to send data to a server and receive data from a server. Now, HTTP works with what's referred to as a request response architecture. So you, the user, go in and you typically type in a URL, or you click a link, to bring up a URL, and that's a request. That request goes someplace to a server somewhere, and ideally the server will respond with whatever it is you asked for, and it'll put it into a format that you'll be able to understand on your machine. So you send out an HTTP or a Hypertext Transfer Protocol request, all right, and the system or the server will respond with an HTTP or a Hypertext Transfer Protocol response. All right, and as it says, this is true for all web applications, not just ASP.NET. All right, HTTPS, as mentioned there, it's a stateless protocol. All right, and does that matter? Does that mean anything? Well, basically, the way I try to explain it to students, in my humble opinion, what it means is that if I sit there and make a request to a server, and then I make another request to the same server a few minutes later, as far as that server is concerned, it has really no recollection, typically, of who I am. Now, that can be changed, of course. You all know about things like shopping cart systems, where I can go and I can put something into a shopping cart, and I can either decide to purchase it, or I can leave it there to purchase at a later time, or maybe even remove it from a shopping cart. All right, so I already mentioned this to you. As it says, the server which serves the request is called a web server. It does not maintain any state of the previous requests. This is what I mentioned before with that stateless protocol. If the user requests the same resource again, the web server responds as though it's never gotten that request from the user before. Though there are several mechanisms available to maintain state, inherently, by default, HTTP and HTTPS are stateless. All right, so you're sitting there, you're a user, you're sitting there, and you key something in to your browser. All right, that's how you're going to access your web application. Remember, though, the browser can only understand certain things. All right, basically the language of the web is hypertext markup language, or HTML. HTML is what you use to provide the content for a website. CSS, or cascading style sheets, allows you to format that content, make it more aesthetically pleasing, and JavaScript, all right, typically allows for user interactivity in a website. So as it says, the web technology has to convert the ASP.NET MVC code into a combination of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So again, HTML allows you to lay out the web page, the content. CSS allows you to apply styles, all right, make it more aesthetically pleasing. And JavaScript, as it says, processes the elements at the client side without having to go back to the server. We'll get into that more later. So what's the role, as mentioned here, of a web application framework? All right. As it says, we just saw that if the user requests a resource, the web server delivers the requested resource. Okay? It says, then why do we need web apps at all? Okay? Well, there's a problem here. Now, this is the example they give. And they say, consider a scenario where you have to publish SAT test scores. There are more than 1.5 million students taking that exam per year. All right? You have to create 1.5 million HTML files if you want to create the resources manually. You know, one for each student taking the test. Well, it would make much more sense to write a web application which would talk to a database which could conceivably house all 1.5 million students who are taking the test, and then generate the individual web pages or page for each student accordingly. As it says, it results in a huge savings of time and effort. At the core, the purpose of any web application development framework is to generate the resources such as web pages dynamically. So in other words, it should be as simple for the end user to use as possible. All right. Apart from the generation of web pages dynamically, web application development frameworks may have or support the following functionalities. Well, security is paramount. Okay, as it says, some of the web pages should only be accessed by people with certain roles. In other words, if I'm going to go out to Amazon, I should not be able to go out and I can add my own things into Amazon, but I shouldn't be allowed to go in and change prices. I shouldn't be allowed to remove things other than my own things that might be in my own shopping cart. As it says, only administrators should be able to do things like that. Second is caching. Caching is primarily used, as it says, to improve the performance of the application. Well, in a nutshell, my definition of caching is basically saving something to an area of memory in the computer so when you need to use it again, you can bring it back in without having to go out and make another call for it. All right? Easier data access. All web applications, as it says there, use a database or some kind of what's referred to as a data store. It typically is a database, all right, to store and fetch data. Okay, web application framework should support any and all database technologies. There are a few other features, as it says, such as ASP.NET MVC, and we're going to get into that in just a minute. All right. Now back, in its day, when I taught this same class, the AWD1111 class, when I taught it in the fall of 2017, it was an entire class on ASP.NET Web Forms. And then the last chapter of the book that we used was on ASP.NET MVC. Now the class is geared almost totally towards ASP.NET MVC. All right? Do you care? Why do you need to care? Well, if you look here, as it says right here, checking my time, it says why ASP.NET MVC when we have web forms? All right? Web forms aren't going to go away because there are hundreds, if not thousands, if not millions of applications out there that use them. But we talked before about the statelessness of the web. Doesn't work all that well with ASP.NET web forms. You have to use something called viewState. Not going to even get into it. One of the key components for this entire class is this. What MVC or Model View Controller allows for is a separation of concerns. If you've done any work whatsoever, with website creation, even if it's totally client-side, you've worked with HTML, the hypertext markup language, CSS, cascading style sheets, and JavaScript. Now, it could be JavaScript, it could be a JavaScript library like jQuery, etc. But if you're writing really good code to create a website, what you will do is your HTML files will hold only HTML and links to your CSS files, which will be in their own folder with a .css extension, and your own JavaScript files. Okay, so there'll be a separation of concerns. Each of these is doing something different, so they'll all be in their own type of file. In much the same way, what you want to do is you want to separate your model from your view from your controller. All right? Now, in order to do that, just so you know, to my knowledge, there are no MVC or Model View Controller police. So you should do things a certain way if you're following the MVC pattern, but doesn't necessarily mean you have to. If you break the rules, nobody's going to really ding you for it, so to speak. All right? Now I'm going to stop right here, and I'm going to come back and explain how ASP.NET MVC works, and that'll be in part 2 of this lesson in just a couple minutes.